The door swung open and smoke was rising from a chimney he had not lit in 6 months. Light in a window he kept dark on purpose. And a woman he had never seen before was standing at his stove cooking dinner in a dead man's kitchen. She said she was his wife. He had never sent for one, but someone in this house had. This is where the story begins. The door swung open and Beckett Graves stopped dead in his boots. Smoke rising from the chimney he had not lit in 6 months. Light glowing from the window he kept dark on purpose. And a smell, warm bread, thick stew, something sizzling in the pan that punched him straight in the chest like a fist wrapped in a memory he had spent 3 years trying to bury. His hand moved to the rifle on his back before his mind caught up with his instincts. Because nobody cooked in this house. Nobody was supposed to, not anymore. He stood in the doorway of his own home and could not move forward and could not step back, caught in that narrow place between what he knew to be true and what his senses were telling him. And for a moment, just a moment, the smell of that bread took him somewhere he did not want to go. A kitchen full of light. A woman humming while she worked. The sound of his own laughter, which he had not heard in so long. He was not certain he still knew how to make it. He pushed that down. Hard. Fast. The way he pushed everything down now. The Montana evening stretched cold behind him. October light dying on the ridgeline. 4 miles east of Elkhorn, the Graves Ranch sat in a valley where the wind came down off the mountains and never quite stopped. And Beckett had ridden home through that wind since before dawn, checking fence lines he maintained out of habit rather than hope, moving through the motions of a life that had stopped meaning anything the day they put Rosalind in the ground. 3 years of that. 3 years of riding out at first light and coming home to darkness. 3 years of cold food at a table set for one in a house that had been built for a family and now held only a man who had forgotten how to want one. He had pulled a calf out of a flash flood with his bare hands at 2 in the morning water, so cold it stopped feeling like water and started feeling like knives. He had ridden through Apache territory alone with nothing but a canteen and a prayer. He had stood at the edge of his wife's grave in the pouring rain and not shed a single tear. Not because he did not feel it, but because there was nobody left to cry with. That was the kind of man Beckett Graves was. The kind who kept going because stopping was not something his body knew how to do, even after his heart had quit the job entirely. So when he stepped through his own front door that October evening and saw a young woman standing at his stove, the feeling that moved through him was not anger. Not exactly. It was something more disorienting. Like walking into a room in your own house and finding it belongs to someone else. She was small. That was the first thing he registered. Small in a way that made the kitchen seem larger around her, as though she had stepped into a frame that was several sizes too big. Her dress was navy blue, the kind of traveling dress a woman from the East might wear with a fitted bodice and small lace details at the collar and cuffs. It was dusty from the road. One boot had a split in the sole that had been stitched back together with what looked like coarse twine. Her hair was honey blonde, partly pinned up in a modest arrangement that was losing its battle with gravity, soft pieces falling around her face and temples, catching the lamplight like threads of gold. Her eyes were blue. Not the pale washed-out blue of a winter sky, but the deep saturated blue of cornflowers in full bloom. Large and expressive with dark lashes, and there was something behind them that Beckett could not name right away. Not fear, something older than fear. She looked at him directly. Behind him, the sound of 2 more horses pulling into the yard, heavy boots on the porch. The particular weight of men who had been built by the same blood and the same hard ground, and then Slade and Emmett Graves filled the doorway behind their brother, and the kitchen that had seemed too large for the girl now seemed too small for all of them. 3 men. Identical in the way that only brothers born within minutes of each other can be identical. Same height, towering past 6.5 feet. Same chestnut brown hair, sun-streaked and wind-roughened. Same amber eyes, the color of whiskey, held up to firelight. Same square jaws, same broad shoulders, same calloused hands that had built every fence post and barn wall on this ranch from raw timber and stubborn will. But not the same expression. Not now. Beckett's face was stone, closed and cold and giving nothing away. Slade's face was a storm building. His jaw was already tight and his hands were already curling at his sides. Not into fists exactly, but close. His eyes moved from the girl to the stove, to the clean dishes stacked in the dry sink, to the swept floor, taking inventory of everything that had changed in their absence, cataloging it the way he cataloged threats. And Emmett's face held something else entirely. Something that flickered between guilt and relief and a careful, quiet hope that he was trying very hard not to let either of his brothers see. The girl set down the spoon she was holding. She wiped her hands on a cloth that Beckett recognized as one of Rosalind's old dish towels, and the sight of it in a stranger's hands did something to his chest that he was not prepared for. "My name is Eleanor Whitfield," she said, "and before you reach for that rifle, you should know that your dinner is almost ready." The silence that followed was the kind of silence that has weight to it, the kind you can feel pressing against your skin. It sat in the kitchen between them like a fifth person taking up space, breathing its own air. Beckett stared at her. "Lady," he said. He stopped, started again. "You are standing in my house." "I know," she said. "Cooking at my stove." "Yes." He looked around. She had cleaned the place. The dishes that had been stacked in the dry sink for 2 weeks were washed and set proper. The floor had been swept clean. The blanket on the chair by the fireplace, the one he always left crumpled there because it did not matter, had been folded with careful hands. "You cleaned my house," he said. "It needed it," she said simply, and turned back to the stove. Slade took a step forward. Beckett put an arm out without looking, stopping his brother the way he had been stopping his brother from charging into things since they were 16 years old. And the world first taught them that nobody was going to stop Slade Graves except one of his own. "How did you get in?" Beckett said. His voice was flat, controlled, the voice of a man who is deciding what kind of problem he is dealing with. "Your back window does not latch right," she said. She glanced back at him over her shoulder, and something almost like a smile crossed her face. "Almost. You should fix that. Anybody could walk in." "Anybody did walk in," Beckett said. She pulled the pot off the heat, set it on the iron trivet on the table, laid out a bowl and a spoon like she was setting a proper table. Like this was a thing that happened here. Like there were not three men standing behind her with their blood running hot and their jaws locked tight. "Sit down," she said. "Eat first. Then I will explain everything." "You will explain everything right now," Beckett said, "before I decide whether I am going to the sheriff." She stopped, turned to face him fully, both hands at her sides, and he saw it then. What he had not seen before. Her dress was torn at the hem, dried mud caked along the edge, the stitched boot, and her left wrist where the sleeve had slipped back slightly showed the faded yellow edge of a bruise that was maybe 4 or 5 days old. Someone had grabbed her. Someone had held on hard enough to leave a mark. Slade saw it too. His jaw went from tight to something harder, something that Beckett recognized because he had seen it on his brother's face before, and it always preceded action that could not be taken back. Beckett lowered the rifle. He did not put it down, but he lowered it. "Explain," he said. "Quiet now." Eleanor Whitfield pulled out the chair at the table and sat down across from where the bowl was set. She folded her hands. She looked at him directly without apology, but without pride either. Just the flat, clear truth of someone who had already lost too much to waste time on pretense. "I answered an advertisement," she said. "Published in the Eastern papers 3 months ago. A rancher in Montana Territory seeking a wife." She paused. The advertisement was posted under the name Beckett Graves. The silence changed shape. Beckett turned his head slowly and looked at Emmett. His youngest brother, by 12 minutes, stood near the wall with a cup of coffee he had poured to give his hand something to do. And on his face was the guilty expression of a man who had been expecting this moment and had not quite finished preparing for it. "You," Beckett said. One word. It landed like a hammer. Emmett set down the cup. He met his brother's eyes. "You were dying," he said quietly. "Not fast, slow. The kind of dying where a man wakes up every morning and puts on his boots and does the work, and nobody notices because his body keeps going even after everything else stops." He paused. "I could not watch it anymore, Beck. None of us could." Slade shifted against the doorframe. He had known about the advertisement. He had argued against it for 3 weeks before Emmett sent it, and he had lost the argument, not because Emmett was more persuasive, but because Emmett was right, and Slade knew it, and that was worse. "So you sent for a wife," Beckett said to Emmett, "under my name." I sent for a chance, Emmett said. If nobody came, we lost nothing. If someone came, he trailed off. She came. Nell sat at the table watching this exchange with the focused attention of someone who is learning the shape of a family by the way they fight. She had not expected three men. The advertisement had described one. But she was here now, and the door she had come through was a long way from everything she had left behind, and the road back was a road she could not afford to travel. I did not come here to deceive anyone, she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands in her lap were not entirely still. I answered a letter. I traveled 3 weeks by stagecoach from Arizona Territory, changed routes twice. I have no money to return, no family waiting, and no place that is expecting me. She looked at Beckett. The advertisement said you needed someone. I am someone. Nobody spoke. The stew sat on the table, giving off steam that curled in the lamplight like something trying to rise. Miss Whitfield, Beckett said, and his voice had shifted from anger to something more measured, but no less guarded. I did not write that letter. I did not place that advertisement. And I am not looking for a wife. I understand that now, she said. So I will offer you something different. 3 days of work in exchange for 3 nights of shelter. I sleep in the barn. If after 3 days you want me gone, I will go. No questions. Slade spoke for the first time. Where would you go? He said. It was not the question she expected from the one who looked the most hostile. There was no gentleness in it, but there was a practical directness that suggested Slade Graves, for all his hard edges, was not a man who would send a woman with a bruised wrist in torn boots into the Montana wilderness at nightfall without knowing she had somewhere to land. Nell did not answer right away, because the truth was she did not know. She had arrived at the end of her road, and the road had led here, and if this was not the right place, she was not certain there was a right place left. I will figure it out, she said, but not tonight. Beckett looked at her for a long time. He looked at the bruise on her wrist. He looked at the stitched boot. He looked at the way her shoulders were set, not defeated, not desperate, just settled. The way a person gets when they have already rehearsed every version of how this moment might go and made peace with all of them. 3 days, he said. You sleep in the barn. The barn door does not lock. You can leave any time you want to. Do you understand me? I understand you, she said. He sat down across from her, picked up the spoon, ate a mouthful of the stew. He did not say anything for a moment because the stew was good. Better than good. Thick and seasoned with something he could not identify, the kind of warmth that started in your stomach and moved outward like the first fire of autumn. He had not tasted anything that good in 3 years. He did not say that. Emmett brought blankets and a pillow out to the barn himself. Slade went out before him and checked the space without being asked, fixed a loose hinge on the side door, cleared a clean area near the hay, came back inside without looking at Nell, without saying a word about what he had done. That was how Slade Graves showed care, through action, never through words. That night, Eleanor Whitfield lay in the barn of a ranch she had never seen before that afternoon, listening to the Montana wind move through the gaps in the plank walls. The hay smelled of dust and summer and something faintly sweet, and the horse in the stall nearby shifted and breathed in the slow rhythm of an animal that felt safe. For the first time in months, she did not hear the sound of hoofbeats chasing her in her mind. She did not know who these 3 men were. Not really, but the door was not locked. She could leave if she wanted to, and just that was enough to close her eyes. She was up before them the next morning. That was the first thing that surprised Beckett Graves. He heard sounds from the kitchen before daylight, the scrape of the fire poker, the clink of the pot. And he lay in his bed in the dark, and his body did something it had not done in a very long time. It relaxed, not much but some, like a gate that had been held shut so long the hinges had rusted and something was putting the smallest amount of oil on the mechanism. Emmett in the next room noticed it too. He lay in his own dark and smiled, the first real smile in longer than he could remember. By the time all 3 brothers had their boots on and walked to the kitchen, she had coffee ready and was standing at the window looking out at the yard with her arms crossed, her face reading something in the early light that none of them could see. Morning, she said without turning. Beckett poured himself a cup. Slade stood by the door, arms crossed, studying her the way he studied anything that had entered his territory uninvited. Emmett sat at the table and waited, And then she turned from the window and did the thing that would change everything. She put a piece of torn brown paper on the table. Written on the back in neat, precise handwriting was a list. "Your east fence line," she said, "the one running past the dry creek bed. About 60 yards of it is down. Your chickens have not been laying because the coop has a gap in the back wall where something has been getting in at night, probably a weasel. Your water trough by the barn has a crack running about 4 inches along the base. It has not broken through yet, but it will by winter if it freezes." She paused. "Your south side barn roof is missing shingles. The corral gate latch is broken, and the garden plot behind the house has gone completely to weeds." Beckett set down his cup very slowly. "You made a list of everything wrong with my ranch," he said. "I made a list of what needs doing," she said. "There is a difference." 3 pairs of amber eyes looked at her, 3 identical faces processing the same information in 3 different ways. "Mr. Graves," she said, and her voice was even and clear and not unkind. "I do not know what happened here. I do not know why this place is the way it is. It is not my business, and I am not asking. But I have been working on ranches since I was 9 years old, and I can see what this land is supposed to be. It is good land. It has just been let go." She paused. 3 days is not enough to fix all of it, but it is enough to start. The kitchen was very quiet. Coffee steam rose between them. Outside, the Montana morning was turning from gray to pale gold over the ridgeline, and somewhere a meadowlark was singing the first notes of something that sounded unreasonably like hope. Beckett Graves sat there across from her. He thought about what he was going to say. He thought about telling her it was not her business what had happened here, which she had already said herself. He thought about telling her 3 days was 3 days and that was the end of it. He thought about telling her he did not want anything started that was not going to be finished. What he said was this: "I will show you where the fencing tools are kept." She worked like she had been born to it. That was the thing Beckett could not reconcile watching her from across the yard that first afternoon. The way she moved through the physical labor of the ranch and with a quiet efficiency that reminded him against his will of someone who knew exactly what each task demanded before she started it. She did not ask for help. She did not complain. She did not do the thing he half expected, which was to make a show of working hard so that he would notice. She just worked, like it was for her own reasons, like the ranch itself was the thing she was answering to, not him. Slade found her at the fence line mid-afternoon, hammer in hand, driving nails into the post with clean, sure strokes. Not the tentative swings of someone learning, but the practiced rhythm of someone who had done it 1,000 times before. He stood watching for a full minute before she acknowledged him. "Where did you learn to do that?" he said. She did not look up from the nail. "My father's ranch outside Flagstaff, about 200 acres. Ran cattle, sheep for a while." Slade heard the tense she used. Had he said? She confirmed with a nod and moved to the next post. Slade stood there another moment. Something shifted in his face. Not softness. Slade Graves did not do softness. But the suspicion that had been sitting in his jaw since the moment he first saw her at the stove eased by a fraction. The smallest fraction. Just enough to notice if you knew where to look. "You are better than I thought," he said. And from Slade Graves, that was the highest compliment he had ever paid anyone outside of his own blood. Emmett found his own way to her. He worked beside her without being asked, and they fell into a natural rhythm. He held the post. She drove the nail. They did not need many words. Emmett told small stories about Montana, about the bear that got into the chicken coop last winter, about the time Slade fell off his horse into the creek in January. "Do not ever mention that in front of him," Emmett said. Nell almost smiled. Almost. And Beckett watched from the barn door, from the horse pen, from the far fence line. He did not join them, but he watched. And he realized he was watching. And he did not know what to do with that realization, so he buried it the way he buried everything now. Shoved it into the dark and walked away before it could follow him back out. That evening she cooked again. Nobody asked her to. Nobody announced it. Beckett came in from the barn after dark and the smell hit him again. Fried eggs and salt pork and fresh biscuits. Simple fare but hot and ready. And Nell was already eating her portion at the table when all 3 brothers sat down. 4 people at a table that had not held 4 people since Roslyn. "You do not have to do this," Beckett said. "I know," she said. I am not asking you to cook every night, I know that too. She looked up. I like to cook. It gives me something to do in the evenings. A pause. And all three of you look like men who have not had a proper meal in longer than 3 days. Emmett smiled into his plate. Slade studied his biscuit with intense focus. Beckett said nothing. The silence between them was strange. Not uncomfortable exactly, but charged. Like the air before a thunderstorm. Like all four of them were aware of something building that none of them had named yet. Tell me about the land, Nell said after a while. Before, what it was like when you first came here. Beckett looked at her, wishing, because the way a man talks about his land before it went wrong tells you what it could be again. Something shifted in Beckett's chest. Something uncomfortable and warm in equal measure. He looked down at his plate. There was a creek that ran year-round along the north border, he said slowly. Not anymore mostly, but it used to. Rosalind planted apple trees along it, 4 of them. I do not know if they are still alive. I have not walked up that way and... He stopped, looked out the window at the dark. A while. Emmett set down his fork quietly. Slade stopped chewing. The name Rosalind had not been spoken in this house in a very long time. The south pasture held good grass. Beckett continued. Before the dry years. It could, again probably. With the right management. He paused. I had 12 head of cattle when I first built this place. Down to 4 now. Lost some to drought. Sold some when I needed cash. Could not bring myself to care enough to build the herd back up. But you care now, Nell said quietly. He looked at her sharply. What makes you say that? Because you are talking about it in the present tense, she said. Like it is still real. Beckett stared at her. He wanted to say something dismissive. Something that would put the walls back where they belonged. Instead, what he felt was seen. Like standing in an open field with nowhere to retreat to. And the thing about being seen by someone with cornflower blue eyes who has cleaned your house and repaired your fence and made a list of everything your ranch needs in handwriting, more precise than your own, is that you cannot pretend the field is not open. He cleared his throat, stood up, pushed back his chair. I will fix the latch on the corral gate before bed, he said, and walked out into the cold October dark. Emmett watched him go, then looked at Nell. He is not good with this, Emmett said gently. This meaning whatever was happening in this kitchen, whatever was rebuilding itself in the air between a woman who made lists and a man who had stopped caring about anything on any list. I know, Nell said. I am not either. Slade, still at the table, looked at her for the first time without suspicion. His expression held something else entirely. 3 days, he said. Not as a reminder. It sounded like a question. 3 days, Nell confirmed. But her voice sounded like a question too. But the next dawn would bring a name, and that name would change everything. On the morning of the second day, Beckett was in the barn when he heard hoofbeats coming up the drive. Hard and fast. Not the casual pace of a neighbor dropping in, but the urgent gallop of a man carrying news he does not want to carry. He stepped out to see Harlan Kendrick pulling up short in the yard in a spray of dust. Harlan's face was wrong, white around the edges. Beck, he said. His voice was tight. You hear what happened in town last night. Slade and Emmett came out of the house. Nell appeared at the door of the barn she had been sleeping in, hay in her hair, her face alert. Virgil Parrish, Harlan said. Somebody served him papers yesterday afternoon. County marshal came in everything. Says he owes back debt on his land title. Some banking claim from 1873, supposedly signed by his father. Beckett felt something cold move through him. Virgil's father died in 1871, he said. I know, Harlan said. Everybody knows. But the papers look legal. Virgil showed them to the lawyer in town, and the man could not find clear reason to dispute them. Harlan glanced toward the barn. He saw Nell standing in the doorway, and his eyes went back to Beckett, questioning. She is working here for a few days, Beckett said, shortly. What else? Word is there is a man in town. Came in 2 days ago, staying at the hotel. Name of Judson Blake. And Harlan Kendrick said the name, and the name landed in the morning air the way certain names do. With a particular weight that tells you the person attached to it has earned that weight through harm. He has men with him, Harlan continued. 3 or 4 at least. Been buying drinks at the saloon and asking questions about who owns what land in the county, what the water rights look like, where the railroad is planning to come through. He paused. He is a speculator, Beck, the land grab kind, and Virgil is just the first. Beckett said nothing for a moment. He was processing, running the information through the part of his mind that assessed threats the way a cattleman assesses weather, by looking at what was building on the horizon and deciding how bad it was going to get. And then he heard it, or rather, he heard the absence of it. The morning had gone perfectly still behind him. The small sounds that Nell made as she moved through the world, the quiet rustling, the steady, efficient presence that he had already begun to recognize without realizing it had stopped completely. He turned. Her face had changed. Whatever careful neutrality she kept there, whatever measured distance she had been holding for 2 days was gone. In its place was something hard and raw and old, like a scar suddenly exposed to light. "You know that name?" Beckett said. It was not a question. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes were fixed somewhere past him, past the yard, past the fence line. "Yes," she said. Her voice was flat, controlled. The kind of control that comes from having already been through the fire and learning to live right next to the heat. "I know that name." The morning stretched between all of them. 5 people standing in a ranch yard in Montana Territory, with the sound of Harlan Kendrick's horse shifting its weight and the distant meadowlark going silent, as if it too understood that something fundamental had just shifted in the shape of this story. "Tell me," Beckett said. She told them at the table. She told them all of it, not in pieces, not carefully, but in the flat, relentless way of someone reading a record. Someone who had organized the facts of a terrible thing into a shape they could carry because the alternative was letting it carry them. Her father, Amos Whitfield, had owned their land outside Flagstaff for 11 years. Built it from nothing. Dry land, dead soil, the same kind of stubborn nothing that becomes something when the right person refuses to give up on it. They had cattle, a good-sized garden, an orchard just starting to produce. Her mother had died when Nell was 16. Her brother had gone east and never come back. It was just Nell and her father. And it was enough. It was home. Judson Blake came to Arizona Territory 2 years ago. He had money, railroad money, land company money, and he had lawyers, and he had documents. And he had men who stood just at the edge of what was legal with their hands near their guns. He bought land from people who were willing to sell. And when they were not willing, he found other ways. For Amos Whitfield, the way was a forged debt claim tied to a water rights agreement her father had signed 15 years earlier. One where a single word changed in a document that looked exactly like the original transformed what had been a usage agreement into a collateral claim. The forgery was good enough that the county judge, who had recently received a very generous donation to his re-election fund, ruled in Blake's favor without much deliberation. "We had 2 weeks," Nell said. "We appealed to the territorial court. They dismissed it. We went to the federal land office. They said it would take 6 months to investigate, and we should vacate in the meantime." She stopped, looked at her hands. "My father refused to leave. They sent men. He is not a violent man. He did not fight them. But when you have built something with your hands for 11 years and someone takes it out from under you with a piece of paper, something breaks." She looked up. "He had a stroke 3 months ago. He is alive. He is in Flagstaff with a family that took him in out of kindness. He cannot work anymore, cannot speak clearly." She exhaled through her nose, and the exhale carried 3 months of carrying this alone. "That is why I was on that stagecoach. I do not have anything left to stay in Arizona for." The kitchen was completely still. 3 brothers sat across from her, and each one absorbed this differently. Because that is what brothers do. They take in the same information and process it through different machinery and arrive at different kinds of readiness. Emmett's eyes were red at the rims. He did not speak. He stood up, poured a cup of coffee, set it in front of Nell without a word, and then boom. That was how Emmett Graves said, "I hear you," through small acts of care so precise they could not be mistaken for anything else. Slade's fists were clenched on his thighs. His jaw was set so hard you could see every tendon running beneath the skin. "What that man did to your father," he said. Not a question. And his voice held something dangerous. Slade Graves, when truly angry, did not raise his voice. He went quiet. And the quiet was worse. "And now he is here," Slade said, "doing the same thing. And now he is here," Nell confirmed. Beckett stood up from the table. He walked to the window. stood there with his back to all of them, looking out at the dark, looking at the fence line they had repaired yesterday, looking at the garden plot Nell had already started clearing, looking at the land that he had let die for 3 years because he could not bear to keep it alive without Rosalind. "He will come for our land," Beckett said. "Your land sits between two water sources," Nell said quietly. "In this part of the territory in a drought year, that is worth more than the railroad. Yes, he will come for it." Beckett turned from the window, looked straight at Nell. "You said you wanted 3 days. That was yesterday's offer." "Yes, I am changing the terms." Slade and Emmett both looked at him. "You stay as long as you need to. In exchange, you tell us everything you know about Judson Blake, how he works, how he documents, what he uses, what he is afraid of." The kitchen held its breath. Nell looked at Beckett, looked at Slade, whose fists were still clenched on his thighs, who was angry on her behalf before she had even finished telling him why. Looked at Emmett, who had put coffee in front of her without being asked. She had been alone with this for 3 months. Alone with the knowledge of what Blake had done and the certainty that he would keep doing it, and the helplessness of having no power and no allies and no ground to stand on. And now 3 men who looked like the same man, built 3 times, were sitting across from her, offering to stand on that ground beside her. "All right," she said quietly. "All right," Beckett said. And Emmett looked at Slade, and Slade looked at Emmett. And in that look, for the first time in 3 years, both of them saw the thing they thought they had lost forever. Beckett Graves wanted to fight for something. Somewhere out there in the dark on the road between Elkhorn and whatever town Judson Blake had come from, the next chapter of something was already moving toward them. Beckett Graves did not know yet what he was going to do about it. But for the first time in 3 years, he felt something he had not expected to feel again. He felt like fighting. Good land always holds out longer than you expect. And this land had been holding out for a very long time, waiting for someone stubborn enough to notice what it could still become. Tomorrow she would tell them about the notary seal. Tomorrow he would ride into Elkhorn and look Judson Blake in the face. Tomorrow everything they thought they knew about the shape of this fight would change. But the decision that mattered most had already been made, in a kitchen that smelled like bread and stew, by a man who had forgotten he was capable of making decisions that large, and a woman who had traveled 3 weeks by stagecoach to reach the end of her road and found that the end was not an end at all. It was a beginning. She just did not know it yet. None of them did. Beckett Graves did not sleep that night. He sat in the chair by the cold fireplace long after the lamp burned out, turning the same thought over and over in his mind, the way a man works a splinter with his thumb. Not to fix it yet, just to know exactly where it is, exactly how deep it has gone. Judson Blake was in Elkhorn, and Nell Whitfield had been running from him for 3 months. He was not sure which of those two facts sat heavier. By the time the first gray light came through the window, he had made up his mind about exactly one thing. He needed to go to town. He needed to see this man with his own eyes, because Beckett Graves had lived long enough to know that what people feared was almost never as simple as the shape they had been given to fear it in. And he needed to know what he was actually dealing with before he decided what to do next. He found Nell already in the kitchen when he came out. Same as yesterday, coffee on, standing at the window. She turned and her eyes were clear, which told him she had not slept much either. "I am riding to town," he said. She opened her mouth. "Not because I am protecting you," he said quickly, cutting off whatever argument was forming. "Because if Judson Blake has men in this town and one of them recognizes your face, you lose any advantage you have got before we even know what that advantage is." He held her gaze. "You told me last night how he works. He collects information before he moves. So do I." Nell studied him for a moment. Then she nodded once. "What are you looking for?" she asked. "I want to see the papers." "He served Virgil Parrish," Beckett said, "and I want to look this man in the eye." She was quiet, and then she did the thing that would change how Beckett moved through the rest of this day. She prepared him. "He will be polite," she said. "That is the first thing you need to know. He is not what you expect. Well-dressed, well-spoken. He will shake your hand and look you directly in the face, and you will walk away thinking he seems like a reasonable man." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the specific weight of someone who had learned this particular lesson at a cost that could not be measured in dollars or acres. "That is what he does. He makes you feel like whatever is coming is reasonable. Beckett reached for his hat. Watch his face, she said, not his hands. He touches things, picks them up, turns them over, sets them down. He does it while he is talking, so you are watching his hands instead of his face. It is deliberate. Slade came in from outside, catching the end of this. Let me go with you, he said. 3 Graves brothers walking into that saloon will make Blake think twice about whatever he is planning. Beckett shook his head. 1 man goes to gather information. 3 men go to declare war. It is not time for that yet. Emmett appeared in the doorway. Be careful, brother, he said quietly. Beckett looked at his youngest brother. I have ridden through Apache territory alone with a canteen and a prayer. I will manage a man in a vest at the saloon. Nell said something then that stopped him at the door, said it in a voice that was different from the practical briefing she had been giving, a voice that carried the particular weight of personal experience. Do not underestimate him. She was looking at the table, not at Beckett, at the table itself, as if she could still see her father sitting there. When he came to our home, he sat at our table. My father offered him coffee, and he accepted. And he sat there and said, Mr. Whitfield, I want you to know I genuinely respect what you have built here. That is why I am giving you this opportunity to resolve the matter before it becomes unpleasant. Her jaw tightened, and my father shook his hand. The kitchen was very still. A man who makes you shake his hand while he is stealing from you is the most dangerous kind of man there is. Beckett put his hat on and walked out into the morning. Elkhorn on a Thursday morning was never a loud place, but Beckett felt the difference the moment he rode in. It was in the way people stood talking in 2s and 3s outside the feed store in the post office, leaning in close, voices low. It was in the way old Chester Marsh at the dry goods watched him from behind his window without the usual nod. Something had shifted in the town's posture overnight, the way a herd of cattle shifts before a storm. Not running yet, but already looking for the direction to run. He went to Virgil Parrish first. Virgil was at his usual table in the back of the hardware store, but he was not working. He was sitting with his hands flat on the table, staring at a document in front of him, with the expression of a man trying to read something in a language he almost speaks. He looked up when Beckett came in. Something in his face shifted. Relief maybe at not being alone with it for a minute. Beckett, he said. Virgil. Beckett pulled up a chair and sat across from him. Can I see it? Virgil pushed the document across the table. Beckett read it slowly. He was not a lawyer and he knew it, but he was a man who had read enough land contracts and deed records to know the basic shape of a legitimate claim. He read it twice. He found the section that established the debt, tied to a promissory note from 1873, supposedly signed by Virgil's father when he first established the deed. Your father signed any notes in 1873, Beckett asked. Virgil's face tightened. My father died in 1871. Beckett looked up from the document. There it was. The forgery that Nell had warned him about. Not the kind you could see with your eyes, but the kind that sat in the structure of the document like a crack in a foundation wall. Invisible until you knew to look for it. Do not sign anything, he said. Not one thing. Not even an acknowledgement of receipt. You understand me. Virgil looked up at him. You know something about this man. Enough, Beckett said. I will be in touch. He found Judson Blake at the hotel. The hotel was also the best saloon in town, which was not saying much, but Blake had clearly decided to make it work. He was at a corner table with 2 men who sat at angles to each other in the way that men sit when their primary job is to watch the room. Blake himself was turned toward the window reviewing papers, a cup of coffee at his elbow, and he looked exactly as Nell had described. Like a reasonable man, well-dressed, composed. The kind of careful, groomed quality that money and patience build together. He was perhaps 45 with clean hands and a tailored coat, and the particular stillness of a man who has never had to raise his voice because the machinery he operates runs on quieter fuels than shouting. He looked up when Beckett walked in, and he smiled. Good morning, he said pleasantly. You look like a man with something on his mind. I am Beckett Graves. I have land 4 miles east. Ah! Blake set down his pen. I have been meaning to ride out your way, Mr. Graves. Your property came up in my research. Interesting parcel, good elevation, 2 natural water sources in close proximity. My land is not for sale, Beckett said. Most things are not, Blake said, And the smoothness of it was exactly the thing Nell had warned him about. The particular velvet quality that made unreasonable things sound perfectly reasonable until they were not. Beckett held the man's gaze for a long moment, and he did what Nell had told him to do. He watched the face, not the hands. Blake's fingers were turning a pen over and over on the table surface, a slow, deliberate rotation that drew the eye downward away from the expression above. But Beckett kept his eyes up, and what he saw in Judson Blake's face was the most dangerous thing a man could carry: patience, the kind that had never yet been beaten. "I will be watching," Beckett said. "Whatever you are doing in this county, I will be watching it." Blake tilted his head slightly. "I would expect nothing less from a conscientious landowner." A pause. He set the cup down very gently. "I do hope, Mr. Graves, that you are not allowing yourself to be influenced by outside parties, people who might have their own interests in how this territory develops." Another pause, softer this time, with the particular softness of a threat that does not want to be called a threat. A man alone on his land, no family, no allies. He should be careful about who he takes counsel from. Beckett went very still. He heard it. Blake was not talking about neighbors or lawyers. Blake was talking about Nell. He knew she was at the ranch. He knew Beckett had not been alone. "Careful is a good word," Beckett said evenly. "I have always been partial to it." He turned and walked out. His hands were steady and his heart was hammering. And he did not let either of those things show in how he moved through the door and across the street to where his horse was tied. He rode hard on the way home, not because he was afraid, or not only that, but because his mind was moving faster than his horse, and he needed the physical motion to keep up with it. Blake had made two things clear in that conversation. One, he was already planning to come after the Graves Ranch. And two, he knew Beckett had not been alone. He pulled into the yard and Nell was at the fence line on the west side working with wire. Slade was 20 yards further down doing the same. They both looked up when Beckett rode in hard. He dismounted and walked straight to Nell. Slade followed. "He knows you are here," Beckett said. She did not look surprised. She looked like someone who had been half expecting it and was only now feeling the full weight of being right. "What did he say?" "He did not say your name. He did not have to." Beckett pulled off his gloves. "He warned me about outside parties and their interests. And he looked at me the whole time like a man who already knows something I do not." Slade's jaw tightened. "One of his men, somebody in town, told him." Nell set down the wire tool and straightened. "He has people in every town. That is how he works. He gets there. He buys information. And before anyone has even realized what is happening, he already knows the shape of the place. Who matters? Who does not? Who can be bought? And who needs to be broken?" "Who in Elkhorn would have told him about you?" Beckett said. "The feed store man," Nell said. "He was the one who told me about your ranch when I first arrived. Told me there was a rancher 4 miles east who lived alone and did not seem to care much about the place anymore." She paused. "If he told me he would tell anyone who paid enough to ask." That afternoon, while Slade was riding the north property line to check for signs of trespass, Nell and Beckett worked side by side at the corral gate. The silence between them was different from the silences of the first day. Less like two strangers being careful, more like two people who had moved past the need for careful and had not quite decided what came next. It was Nell who broke it. "The document he used on my father," she said. "There was something wrong with it, not just the signature." Beckett looked at her. "The notary seal," she said. "Every legal document in the territory gets a specific county seal, depending on which court processes it. The seal on ours was from Maricopa County, but the water rights agreement it supposedly referenced was filed in Yavapai County in 1871. A document modifying a Yavapai filing would have to be notarized in Yavapai, not Maricopa." She paused. "I did not realize it until months later, when it was too late." Beckett was quiet for a moment. "If Virgil's papers have the same kind of error, it might not be the same type," she said. "He is careful. He learns from what worked before and changes what did not. But there will be something wrong with it. There always is with forged documents. You just have to know what you are looking for." "Are there people in the territory who can," Beckett said, "a land record specialist, someone who would know a forged notary seal or a wrong county stamp?" "Yes," she said. There is a man in Helena, former federal land office examiner. His name is Ellsworth Aldridge. She hesitated. But getting to Helena, getting him to come here, building a case before Blake has time to move the legal process forward, that is a matter of weeks at most. Probably less. Then we move in days, Beckett said. She looked at him with something that was not surprise but was close to it. You are serious. You told me yesterday my land is worth fighting for, he said. You think I rode into town and looked that man in the face just to come home and do nothing? A beat. You barely know Virgil Parrish, she said carefully. No, Beckett said, but I know what it is to have land and lose the thing that made it matter. And I am not going to watch that man do to Virgil and Thea Kincaid and Rollins Dunn what somebody should have stopped from happening to your father. The evening air sat between them very still. That night after supper, Nell did not go straight to the barn. She sat at the kitchen table with Emmett washing dishes beside her and Slade leaning against the far wall with his arms crossed and Beckett across from her. And she told them about the notary seal, about Yavapai and Maricopa, about the gap in the forgery that she had found too late. Emmett listened with the particular attention of a man who files every detail for later use. Slade listened with the intensity of a man who is building a case for action. There is a certified copy of the document in the territorial court records in Helena, Nell said. When we first appealed, we had to submit it as evidence. The court would have made a record copy. It would not be the original, but a certified court record of the document that was used against my family. And if it carries the same false notary seal, Beckett said. That is enough, she said. That is enough for Aldridge to work with. How do we get it? Slade said. The Territorial Court Records Office is in Helena, Nell said. I would need to go in person, request it as a party to the original case. I will go with you, Beckett said. So will I, Slade said. The road to Helena is not safe for two people alone. And before Beckett could argue, Slade added something that closed the argument before it could begin. If you are going to fight, we fight together. That is how this family works. That is how it has always worked. Emmett looked at both his brothers. I will stay and watch the ranch, and before they left, he pulled Beckett aside. Brother, he said, she is the best thing that has happened to this place in 3 years. Do not ruin it. Beckett looked at him. I am going to find legal evidence, Emmett. Emmett smiled. Sure, keep telling yourself that. They left before dawn the next morning. Beckett, Nell, Slade. 3 horses moving fast through the cold morning headed northwest toward Helena. Emmett stood on the porch and watched them go and then turned to the empty ranch and began the quiet work of holding things together in their absence, which was what Emmett Graves had been doing for this family his entire life. They were 2 hours out of Elkhorn when Beckett saw the rider. He had been watching the road behind them since they left. Not obviously, not in a way that would look like fear, but with the steady peripheral awareness of a man who knows when something does not add up. And this rider half a mile back had maintained exactly the same distance for 2 hours without closing it or falling behind. Do not turn around, he said quietly. Nell's hand shifted on the reins. How long? Since the junction outside town. Gray coat, big horse. He sat on the saloon porch yesterday morning watching me come out. One of Blake's men. Flat, certain. Slade riding to the right already had his hand near the rifle on his saddle. Let me handle this. No, Beckett said. There is a fork 6 miles ahead. The main route goes straight, but there is a lesser trail that cuts south through a canyon passage before rejoining the road 9 miles further on. Longer, rougher, but the canyon walls swallow a rider in less than a quarter mile. When I say move, we move fast. Nell said something then that made both brothers look at her. Do not slow down for me. Slade glanced at her. You can ride. I can really ride, she said. Do not slow down. Something like respect moved through Slade's expression, 200 yards from the fork. Beckett measured the follower's position in the back of his mind. Still the same distance, still patient, still waiting. Now, they moved. Beckett did not look back. He heard hooves beside him and knew Nell was right there matching his pace, keeping up with 2 men who were each more than a foot taller and 100 pounds heavier. Her hair pulled from its pins, her back straight, her hands steady on the reins. The canyon walls rose up around them and the sky narrowed to a strip overhead. And then there was just the sound of 3 horses running hard through narrow space. He did not slow down for a full mile. When he finally pulled up, they were deep enough into the passage that the main road was invisible behind them. Nell pulled up beside him, breathing hard. Nothing, she said. Slade pulled up on the other side, and he looked at Nell with something that was no longer suspicion or reluctant respect. But the real thing, the full thing, the kind of respect Slade Graves had given to maybe 4 people in his entire life. "You ride like that on your father's ranch," he said. "Since I was 8, she said. He nodded once. The Slade Graves nod, the one that meant more than most men's speeches. They stopped at nightfall at a homestead where Beckett knew the family, a couple named Fisk who took in travelers. Nell fixed a broken porch step before breakfast without being asked. And Mrs. Fisk watched her with the quiet approving attention that ranch women give to other ranch women who understand what work is. Over dinner, Mrs. Fisk looked between Beckett, Slade, and Nell with the comfortable frankness of a woman who had earned the right to her opinions. "You 3 family?" she asked. Nell's hand went still on her fork. Slade looked at the window. "No, ma'am," Beckett said. Mrs. Fisk looked at him. "You have been alone since Rosalind passed." "Yes, ma'am. Long time to be alone," she said simply. And passed the bread, and that was the end of it. But Beckett felt something in the air beside him, not Nell looking at him, something more careful than that, the awareness of being looked at by someone who was choosing not to look, and the particular charge that creates in the space between 2 people who are both pretending the space is not charged. They reached Helena on the afternoon of the second day. The Territorial Court Records Office was staffed by a thin clerk named Guthrie, who had the practiced indifference of a man who has spent 30 years filing things he does not entirely understand. Nell stated her request, a certified copy of the document submitted in evidence in the Whitfield Land Appeal. Yavapai County, 1877. Guthrie disappeared into the back. They waited 20 minutes. Beckett watched the door. Slade stood near the window watching the street. And Nell sat with her hands folded in her lap and her back straight and her face showing nothing. Beckett understood then that she had learned to wait like this somewhere, learned to hold herself that still in rooms where decisions were being made about her life without her having any real power over the outcome. He hated that she had had to learn it. Guthrie came back, set a document on the counter. Nell leaned forward and Beckett watched her face as she read it, watched the thing he had been hoping for happen, a sharp, sudden focusing behind her eyes. "The seal," she said quietly. "Controlled. Tight." Maricopa, Beckett said, reading beside her, "Yavapai County filing. Maricopa notary seal." She looked up at the clerk. "Is Mr. Aldridge's office still on Benton Street?" The clerk blinked. "Yes, ma'am. 3rd door past the assay office." She was already moving. Ellsworth Aldridge was a man of about 60 with the kind of face that had spent decades outdoors before retiring indoors, weathered and keen-eyed and impatient with anything that wasted his time. He listened to Nell without interrupting. He looked at the certified court copy for a long time. Then he put it down on his desk and said the words that changed everything. "I have seen this seal before." Nell and Beckett and Slade all went very still. "Not this exact document," Aldridge said, "but this seal, this specific notary stamp. Look at the registration number beneath it. 1147. He opened a drawer, pulled out a folder, leafed through it with practiced hands, put a paper in front of them. "This is from a Maricopa County case from 1876. Different property, different county, different forged debt claim, same stamp number." He tapped it. "A notary seal number is unique and permanently assigned. This stamp 1147 was issued to a notary in Phoenix who retired in 1871 and whose seal was reported stolen from his estate after his death." He looked up at them, each of them in turn, 3 faces waiting for the word that would make it real. "Judson Blake has been using a dead man's stolen notary seal on forged documents for at least 4 years. The room was completely silent. Nell's breath came out in one long, controlled exhale. The kind of exhale that carries 3 months of holding everything together by force of will. "Can you testify to that?" Beckett said. "In territorial court." "I have been waiting 2 years for someone to bring me enough to testify," Aldridge said bluntly. "I had the Maricopa case, but the family settled before it went to court. Blake offered them just enough money to walk away." He closed the folder. If you can get me in front of a territorial judge in Elkhorn with this document, the Maricopa comparison, and any other properties he is currently moving against, I can build a case that disqualifies every forged document that seal appears on." He paused. "Every single one." Slade, standing in the corner, spoke for the first time since entering the office. Every document. Not a question. A confirmation. The sound of Slade Graves deciding. And when Slade Graves decided, he did not go back. Nell was looking at the paper, and on her face, Beckett saw something he had not seen there before. Not relief, not yet, but the first real edge of something that might become it, like the first crack of light under a door that has been shut for a very long time. "My father's land," she said, almost a whisper. "If the document that took it carries the same seal, then the legal basis for the claim against your father's property was fraudulent," Aldridge said, "which means the ruling can be challenged." He paused, and his voice was measured, not promising more than was real. "It will not be simple, it will not be fast, but it is possible." Nell sat with that word. Possible. She had not had possible in 3 months. She had had certain and terrible and alone. And now this man with 30 years of land records behind his eyes was handing her possible like a lantern in a dark room. "When can you come to Elkhorn?" Beckett said. "Give me 1 day to prepare my documentation," Aldridge said. "I will ride out tomorrow morning." He stood, shook Beckett's hand, shook Slade's. Then he looked at Nell, at this woman who had walked into his office carrying 3 months of loss in her eyes and the specific, hard-worn precision of someone who had learned every detail of the thing that destroyed her. He held out his hand to her too. "Your father built something worth protecting," he said. "I am sorry it took this long for someone to help you protect it." Nell shook his hand. She did not trust her voice enough to answer. They were back on the road within the hour. Beckett set the pace hard and steady because they needed to be back in Elkhorn ahead of Aldridge, ahead of whatever Blake was doing with the time they had been away. Slade rode ahead to scout the road, and for a stretch of that ride, Beckett and Nell were alone. She spoke first. "When we were in Aldridge's office," she said, "when he said my father's land could be challenged." She stopped, reorganized. "I want you to know I came to your ranch because I needed shelter." That was the truth, a pause. "But I stayed because I thought I might be able to help. Because when Harlan Kendrick said Judson Blake's name in your yard, it was not an accident for me. Nothing about this has been entirely accident." Beckett rode beside her in silence for a moment. "You think you came to my ranch for a reason," he said. "I think I ended up in the right place," she said carefully. "I am not always sure reasons are things a person has ahead of time. Sometimes you just keep moving until you are somewhere the ground holds." He thought about that. He thought about his empty house and the smoke from the chimney and the smell of warm bread that hit him in the chest. He thought about her making a list of everything wrong with his ranch and handing it to him like a gift. "Nell," he said. "Yes." He kept his eyes on the road. "I am glad you did not leave after 3 days." The quiet stretched between them, not the charged, uncertain quiet of the first days. Something warmer, something that had direction. "So am I," she said. They rode into Elkhorn 2 hours before sunset and knew immediately something had moved while they were gone. Emmett was waiting in the yard when they reached the ranch, sitting on the porch steps with his hat in his hands and his face carrying something he did not want to carry. Beckett was out of the saddle before the horse stopped. "What happened?" Emmett stood. "Blake moved fast while you were gone. He filed for an emergency court hearing. Day after tomorrow, 6 in the morning, county judge coming from outside the territory." He paused. "That is not the worst of it." Beckett waited. "He served 3 more ranchers yesterday," Emmett said. "Rollins Dunn, Thea Kincaid, Dalton Voss over on the East Ridge. And this morning one of his men rode out here. Told me to tell you that Mr. Blake requests the courtesy of a meeting tonight at 7 at the hotel." A beat. The way he said it, Emmett added quietly. It was not quite a request. Beckett felt the muscle along his jaw go tight. He looked at Nell, then at Slade. Nell was already thinking through it. He could see it in her face. The rapid internal calculation she did when the stakes shifted. "He knows we went to Helena," she said. "His man followed us to the fork, but he would have sent word back regardless. Blake would have assumed Helena and drawn his own conclusions." He is moving the court date up to get ahead of whatever we are bringing back. We need two things, Beckett said. We need to get word to Virgil Rollins, Thea, and Dalton. We need them to agree to stand together in that courtroom with their documents. And we need Aldridge to file a formal motion tonight requesting that the fraud evidence be entered before any property rulings. It has to be on the record before tomorrow morning. Slade said I will ride to the ranchers, every one of them. Tonight. Emmett said I will go with you. Two of us will be more convincing than one. That leaves the motion, Nell said. Aldridge is at his hotel, same hotel as Blake. Then we go to the hotel, Beckett said. Blake's men are at the hotel, Slade said. Then we go to the hotel carefully, Nell said. And Beckett looked at her. You are not afraid of much, are you? Her composure shifted slightly, just enough for him to see underneath it. Not the absence of fear, the choice to operate despite it. The same choice made so many times it had become fluency. I am afraid of plenty, she said quietly. I am afraid my father will not recover. I am afraid that even if we win tomorrow, the territorial process for recovering his land will take longer than I want to think about. She met his eyes. I am afraid I have dragged you into a fight that could cost you everything you have left. That one I am afraid of most of all. You did not drag me, he said. I walked in on my own 2 feet now. His voice was quiet and firm and left no room for the argument she was building. My land is my land and my fight is my fight. And I decided that the morning I rode into town and looked Judson Blake in the face, that had nothing to do with you. He paused. And everything you have done since you walked in my door, the fence line, fence, the garden, those 3 pages of notes about the notary seal. None of that is a burden. Do you understand me? She looked at him for a long moment. The way she looked at him was not the measuring caution of the first days, not the careful professional focus she brought to the work. It was something direct and unguarded, something she had not shown him before because she had not been able to afford to. I understand you, she said. Good, he said. Now let us go find Aldridge. But first there was the matter of Judson Blake. Beckett went to the hotel alone. He went because the worst thing he could do to a man who worked by keeping his opponents off balance was to show up looking completely unworried. Slade and Emmett were already riding to the ranchers. Nell was at the ranch making a list. Her answer to everything Beckett was beginning to understand. The way some people prayed and some people drank, Nell Whitfield made lists. Blake was waiting at the same corner table, same posture, same patient, reasonable face. But there was something different tonight. A subtle tightness around his eyes, a quality of attention that was sharper than before. He had spent days trying to find out what Beckett had gone to Helena for, and the uncertainty did not sit comfortably on a man accustomed to knowing everything ahead of time. Mr. Graves, he gestured to the chair. Thank you for coming. Beckett sat. You went to Helena? Blake said, skipping the pleasantries. People travel, Beckett said. You visited the Territorial Court Records Office, Blake said. In Ellsworth Aldridge. He watched Beckett's face. Yes, I have people in Helena as well. I have people in most places. He paused. I know what Aldridge does. I know what he would have said to you. And I want you to understand before this goes any further that whatever he told you about his evidence, it is not as solid as he believes it to be. Beckett said nothing. He had a theory 2 years ago. Blake continued. It did not hold up then. It will not hold up now. And I want to offer you genuinely as one practical man to another a better path than what you are considering. He reached into his coat and produced a folded document, laid it on the table. I am prepared to purchase your ranch at 140% of its assessed value, cash within the week. Beckett looked at the document. He looked at Blake. Why my land specifically, he said. Blake smiled. You know why. 2 water sources within a half-mile of your property line. When the railroad comes through this county, and it will, the access rights to those sources will be worth 10 times what I am offering you today. He leaned forward slightly. I am not trying to steal from you, Mr. Graves. I am trying to give you a way out of a life that from the outside appears to be something you have already given up on. Beckett thought about what Nell had said. He makes you feel like whatever is coming is reasonable. He thought about Amos Whitfield sitting at his own table drinking coffee with this man before the handshake that cost him 11 years of his life. You made the same offer to the Whitfield family, Beckett said. In Flagstaff, something moved through Blake's expression. Very small, very fast, Amos Whitfield Beckett said. Flagstaff, 1877, water rights agreement with a Maricopa notary seal on a Yavapai County filing. He watched Blake's face with the focused attention Nell had taught him. Not the hands, the face. You want to tell me that seal number 1147 appears on your Elkhorn documents by coincidence? The air in the room changed. Blake's expression did not collapse. It did not crack. But it did what solid things do when the structure underneath them shifts. It held itself more deliberately, the way a wall holds when the foundation moves, consciously, carefully. I think Blake said very quietly that you should be careful about making accusations you cannot support. I did not make an accusation, Beckett said pleasantly. I asked a question. He stood, picked up his hat. Day after tomorrow in county court, but Ellsworth Aldridge is going to answer it for everyone. He put his hat on. Good evening, Mr. Blake. He walked out. The cold night air hit his face and he breathed it in like a man who has just finished something that cannot be unfinished. His pulse was high, but his stride was even, and he did not look back. After that, things moved fast. Beckett found Aldridge at his hotel room through the side entrance. Nell had asked the hotel cook about it the day before they left for Helena, because Nell Whitfield thought 3 moves ahead about everything, always. And Beckett was beginning to understand that this was not caution, but a form of intelligence that had been sharpened by loss into something that could cut through anything. Aldridge had his jacket on before Beckett finished explaining the situation. I will write the motion tonight, Aldridge said. I will need the county court clerk's name. Clement Finch Beckett said. Nell had found that out from the hotel cook in Elkhorn earlier that evening while Beckett was meeting with Blake. She had gone into town separately and asked the right questions of the right people, because that was what Nell Whitfield did. Give me 45 minutes, Aldridge said. Beckett waited in the hallway. At 8:40, Aldridge came out with 3 pages of careful legal language in a jaw set like a man walking into a fight he had been waiting years to have. They went to Clement Finch's house. Finch answered the door in a house robe, read the motion twice, and to his considerable credit said nothing about the hour or the circumstances. He logged it into the court record with a timestamp of 8:57. It was done. Walking back through the dark street, Beckett heard voices from the direction of the hotel. 2 of Blake's men speaking in low, urgent tones. He filed something. Aldridge filed something. Blake needs to know tonight. Beckett pressed himself into the shadow of a building wall and waited until they went back inside. They knew about the motion. Good. Let them know. When he got home, the ranch was quiet. Slade and Emmett had not returned yet. They were still riding from ranch to ranch, gathering the people who would stand in that courtroom. Nell was at the kitchen table, 3 pages of careful handwriting in front of her. Everything she remembered about the Flagstaff documents laid out with a precision and clarity that surprised him and somehow did not. She looked up when he came in. Is it filed, she asked. It is filed. Is it enough? She looked at the pages. It is what I have. Then it is enough, he said. She almost smiled. Not quite, but closer than she had come since she arrived at this ranch with nothing but a navy blue dress and a bruised wrist and the stubborn refusal to stop moving until she found ground that would hold. Slade and Emmett came back near midnight. They had reached all 4 ranchers. Virgil Parrish, Rollins Dunn, Thea Kincaid, Dalton Voss, all in, Slade said. He sat down at the table and poured himself coffee that had gone cold hours ago and drank it anyway. Thea Kincaid did not even let me finish talking before she said yes. Her words were every page that man sent to my property. Emmett smiled when I told her who was behind all of this, who had figured out the notary seal. She asked me which one of you boys married that girl. I told her nobody had married anyone. She said, give it time. Nobody responded to that. But the kitchen held the words the way a well holds water, quietly, deeply, waiting to be drawn up when the time was right. The night settled over the ranch. 4 people in a house that had held only darkness for 3 years. Tomorrow, everything they had built in the days since a girl with cornflower blue eyes walked into a dead man's kitchen and started cooking would either hold or it would not. Emmett washed the dishes. Slade checked the doors. Nell sat at the table writing her final page of notes. And Beckett Graves stood in the hallway outside the room he had not entered in 3 years, looking at a door he had kept shut since the day they buried Rosalind. He had a decision to make, and it had nothing to do with the courtroom. The evening before the trial, Beckett Graves went to the back of his house, to the room he did not enter, to the trunk he had not opened in 3 years. He stood over it for a long time. The lid was pine hand-planed with iron hinges he had forged himself the winter before Rosalind died. There was dust on it now, a fine gray layer that told the story of how long man can live in the same house with something and pretend it does not exist. He knelt down, put his hands on the lid, and the simple act of touching it moved something through him that he was not prepared for. Not grief exactly. Grief had become a thing he carried the way he carried his own weight, so constant it had stopped registering as separate from himself. This was something else. Permission, maybe. The first faint loosening of a lock he had put in place because the alternative to locking it was falling apart. And Beckett Graves did not fall apart. He did not have that luxury. There were fences to mend and cattle to feed, and brothers who needed him to keep standing, even when standing was the hardest thing he had ever done. He opened the trunk. Rosalind's things, folded neat the way he had left them. A shawl she wore on cold evenings. 2 books she had been reading. A bundle of dried wildflowers pressed between the pages of a Bible. And at the bottom, wrapped in cloth, a pair of women's boots. Good leather. Well made. Barely worn. She had gotten them just before the fever came and had only walked in them twice. He remembered watching her try them on in the kitchen, turning her ankle this way and that, laughing at how fine they looked on a ranch woman's feet. He remembered thinking he would see her wear them 1,000 more times. 2 times, that was all the world gave them. He lifted the boots out, held them. They were lighter than he remembered, smaller. The leather still supple after 3 years in the dark because good craftsmanship holds even when no one is looking. He carried them to the kitchen table, set them down. And when Nell came in from the barn to wash up for the evening, he was standing by the window with his back to her. "Try those," he said, without turning around. She stopped. He heard her stop, heard the particular quality of stillness that meant she was looking at the boots and understanding what she was looking at. He walked outside before she could say anything, before she could ask whose they were, because she would know. She would look at the sound and the quality and the newness of them, and she would know exactly whose boots they were and what it meant that he was offering them to her. He stood on the porch in the cold October night and breathed and did not go back inside for a long time. When Nell came out of the barn the next morning, she was wearing them. Neither of them mentioned it, but Beckett saw, and something in his chest that had been locked for 3 years turned just slightly, like a key finding its way into a mechanism that everyone had assumed was rusted shut. 6 in the morning, cold and gray. The courthouse in Elkhorn was a single-story building with tall windows and a flagpole that leaned slightly to the east from years of wind. It was not a grand place. It was not meant to hold grand things. But this morning before 6 o'clock, it held every rancher in the county whose land sat near water. Virgil Parrish was already there when they arrived. His wife Ruth had come without being asked and stood beside him with her hand in his arm and her jaw set in the particular way of a woman who has decided that whatever this day holds, she will stand next to her husband through every minute of it. Virgil looked like he had aged 5 years in a week. The document that carried his dead father's forged signature had done something to him that went deeper than the threat to his land. It had wounded something in the place where a man keeps his father's name. Rollins Dunn stood near the back wall, a quiet man of about 40 who spoke carefully and said little but listened to everything. His presence in the room was the kind that made other people stand a little straighter without knowing why. Thea Kincaid came in her Sunday dress. This was not a sign of deference to the occasion. It was a declaration of intent. She was 62 years old and had run her ranch alone for 8 years since her husband died, and she carried herself with the absolute certainty of a woman who has already survived the worst thing that will ever happen to her and is therefore unimpressed by anything that comes after. She looked at Nell when she walked in, looked at her for a long moment, and then nodded once. The particular nod that older ranch women give to younger ranch women when they recognize something in them worth recognizing. Dalton Voss arrived from the East Ridge before dawn. He was the most reluctant of the group, the last to be convinced, the one who read everything twice before committing. But he was here, and the fact that he was here meant he had made his decision. And Dalton Voss, for all his caution, did not unmake decisions once they were set. Harlan Kendrick stood slightly apart with his arms crossed, watching the street through the window, watching for the other side to arrive. And Ellsworth Aldridge stood at the courthouse door talking to Clement Finch, who had apparently arrived at 5:30 in the morning to ensure the motion was properly entered before proceedings opened. Beckett made a mental note to thank Finch properly when this was over. There were men in the world who did small things at inconvenient hours because they understood that small things at the right moment are not small at all. The three Graves brothers took their positions in the room without discussing it, because they had spent 31 years learning how to occupy space together, and the arrangement was instinct. Beckett stood in the center, Slade to his right, his eyes moving constantly across the room and the windows and the doors, scanning for threats, the way his body scanned for threats, even when his mind was focused elsewhere. Emmett to the left, outwardly calm, but with a tension in his shoulders that told Beckett his youngest brother was coiled tighter than he appeared. Nell stood in front of them, small and straight and composed in her navy blue dress, with Rosalind's boots on her feet, and her honey blonde hair catching the first gray light through the windows. And the image of her there, this woman who barely reached Beckett's chest, standing before three men who could block a doorway with their shoulders alone, said something that no words could have said. It said she was not standing behind them. She was standing with them, and they were standing with her. Judson Blake arrived at 5:56. He came with his two men and his lawyer, a thin man from somewhere south named Pratt, who carried a briefcase and moved through the room with the efficient confidence of someone accustomed to winning on procedural grounds before anyone else had finished reading the docket. And Blake himself. Blake looked, and this was the thing that put a cold thread through Beckett's chest, completely unruffled, composed, patient, like a man who had spent the night reconsidering his approach and had arrived at a new one. That was the dangerous version of Judson Blake. Not the surprise version, the adaptive one. The judge was a heavy-set man named Carver who came out of his chambers at exactly 6:15 and looked at the packed room with the mild surprise of a man expecting a routine hearing and finding something considerably less routine. He read Aldridge's motion first. He read it for a long time. Pratt was on his feet immediately. Your Honor, the motion is an attempt to introduce collateral material into a straightforward property claim proceeding. This court should not allow outside parties to derail legitimate claims with unsubstantiated allegations. Sit down, Mr. Pratt, Judge Carver said without looking up from the motion. He finished reading. Set it down. Looked at Aldridge. You are the examiner from Helena. Ellsworth Aldridge, former federal land examiner. Yes, Your Honor. And you are prepared to testify to the fraudulent nature of the notary instruments used in these claims. With documentation, Your Honor, cross-referenced across 4 properties in this county and a prior case in Maricopa County. Pratt was back on his feet. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The claims before this court are, Mr. Pratt, and this time there was something different in the judge's voice, something that had not been there before. I have read this motion. I have also, I will admit, been in contact this morning with the Federal Land Office in Helena, who were good enough to confirm Mr. Aldridge's credentials and his prior documentation of this particular notary instrument. A pause that landed in the room like a stone in still water. This proceeding will hear the fraud evidence first. You will have full opportunity to cross-examine. Sit down. Pratt sat. Beckett felt Nell beside him release a breath so controlled it was almost inaudible. He did not look at her, but he felt it, the way you feel a shift in the weather before you see it. Aldridge testified for 40 minutes. He was precise. He was thorough. And he was the kind of witness that is most devastating. Not because he is emotional, but because he is utterly, unshakably factual. He laid out the registration number. He produced the record of the original notary's death and the report of the stolen seal. He showed the Maricopa County comparison document. He walked the judge through each of the 4 Elkhorn claims. Seal number 1147, 4 times. 4 different alleged debt instruments, each one dependent on a fraudulent notary certification to establish its legal standing. Then Pratt rose to cross-examine, and he was not ineffective. That was the thing that tightened Beckett's hands on his knees. Your Honor, Pratt said, his voice measured and professional. Mr. Aldridge's evidence relies on a Maricopa County case that never went to trial. The opposing parties settled before the court could render judgment. This means Mr. Aldridge's theory about the seal has never been validated by any court of law. He is presenting speculation, not precedent. The courtroom shifted. It was a small shift, a collective intake of breath, but Beckett felt it. Pratt had a point, a legitimate procedural point. The Maricopa case had settled. Aldridge's evidence had never been tested in a courtroom. Judge Carver looked at Aldridge. The question hung in the air. When Aldridge stood, he was calm. The calm of a man who had waited 2 years for exactly this objection. Your Honor, it is true that the Maricopa case settled before trial, but the reason it settled, the reason Mr. Blake offered that family enough money to walk away, is precisely because he knew that if the case went to court, the seal would be exposed. He purchased silence, not because he was innocent, because he was guilty and wealthy enough to pay for it to stay hidden. He paused. But more importantly, Your Honor, today is not Maricopa. Today there are 4 properties in Elkhorn, 4 documents, the same seal. This is not theory. This is pattern. Pratt started to rise again. Judge Carver held up one hand. Mr. Pratt, I have heard sufficient procedural argument. 4 documents bearing the same stolen seal from a dead notary is not coincidence. Do you have a substantive rebuttal to the content of the evidence? If not, sit down. Pratt sat, and then Judson Blake did the most dangerous thing he had done since arriving in Elkhorn. He stood up. Your Honor, he said, and his voice was smooth and reasonable and perfectly calibrated. I respect the evidence Mr. Aldridge has presented, and I acknowledge that if the notary seal is indeed fraudulent, that is a serious matter for me, as well as I acted in good faith on legal instruments provided to me by my legal counsel. He paused. Let that settle. The image of himself as victim, as a reasonable man who had been misled by his own lawyers. It was masterful. Even Beckett, who knew better, felt the pull of it. However, Blake continued, I must ask this court to consider that the primary witness driving this proceeding, Miss Whitfield, has a direct personal conflict of interest. She believes I took her father's land. She came to Montana not by accident. She pursued me here. She embedded herself with the Graves family with the specific intent of building a case against me. He let that land. Any evidence introduced by a person with a personal vendetta should be weighed with appropriate skepticism. The room went cold. Beckett felt Nell go rigid beside him, not with fear, with fury. The controlled, compressed fury of someone watching the man who destroyed her her father use her pain as a weapon against her in a court of law. And Blake's argument was not stupid. That was the terrible part. It was logical. Nell did have a personal motive. She had followed Blake to Montana. If the judge accepted this framing, everything she had brought to this case would be filtered through the lens of bias. Every piece of evidence she had identified, every detail about the notary seals she had discovered, every page of notes she had written at the kitchen table at 10 o'clock at night, while Beckett watched and understood that he was watching something extraordinary. All of it could be dismissed as the work of a woman with a grudge. The courtroom was holding its breath. Aldridge rose again. His voice cut through the room like a blade through rope. Your Honor, I want to remind Mr. Blake that the seal was not provided by Miss Whitfield. The seal appears on Mr. Blake's own documents that he himself submitted to this court. I'm the former federal land examiner with no connection to Miss Whitfield prior to last week and no personal stake in this proceeding, am the one who identified and verified the fraudulent seal. I did so based on 2 years of independent research conducted long before I ever heard Miss Whitfield's name. He paused. Miss Whitfield may have a motive, but seal number 1147 on Mr. Blake's own papers does not have a motive. It is simply fraudulent. Judge Carver looked at Blake. Mr. Blake, the seal on the documents you submitted to this court either matches a stolen seal in the Federal Registry or it does not. That is a matter of fact, not of opinion. A witness's personal history does not change the number printed on a notary stamp. Blake sat down slowly, and for the first time, the patience on his face became something else entirely. The particular stillness of a man recalculating every option and finding fewer than he expected. Pratt leaned in, whispering. Blake did not respond. Judge Carver looked at the marshal standing at the back of the room. Marshal Webb, you will want to be in contact with the Territorial Prosecutor's Office before Mr. Blake leaves Elkhorn. The room went very still. Marshal Webb straightened. Yes, Your Honor. And then Judge Carver addressed the room. The property claims filed against Parrish Dunn Kincaid and Voss are dismissed on the basis of fraudulent legal instruments. The court will forward its findings to the territorial prosecutor and the federal land office for further proceedings. He paused, looked at the room full of ranchers who had come before dawn to fight for their land. Are there any other matters before this court? And Eleanor Whitfield stood up. She stood up, and the room turned to look at her, every face, every pair of eyes. Even the judge who had not previously acknowledged her presence directly looked at her with the focused attention of a man who has been watching the shape of events and has learned to notice who is at the center of them. Your Honor, she said. Her voice was clear and steady and carried to every corner of that room. It did not waver. It did not break. It was the voice of a woman who had spent 3 months preparing for a moment she was not sure would ever come. And now that it was here, she would not waste a single syllable of it. My name is Eleanor Whitfield. My father, Amos Whitfield, lost his property in Flagstaff, Arizona territory under a claim instrument that carries this same notary seal. The fraudulent document is on record with the Yavapai County Territorial Court. I am requesting that the court's findings today be formally transmitted to the Flagstaff Territorial Office as supporting evidence in a challenge to that prior ruling. She paused, drew one breath. Mr. Blake said one true thing this morning. I do have a personal motive. My father is lying in Flagstaff right now, unable to speak, unable to work, because of what this man did with a stolen seal and a forged document. I have every reason in the world to want justice. She looked directly at Blake. But that does not make the seal less stolen, and it does not make the forgery less real. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Behind her, 3 men who looked like the same man built 3 times stood with expressions that none of them were trying to hide anymore. Beckett's face held something fierce and proud and barely contained. Slade's jaw was set like granite, but his eyes were bright. And Emmett, the gentlest of the 3, was not hiding the fact that his eyes were wet at the edges. Judge Carver looked at Nell for a long moment. Your request is noted and will be entered into the record, he said. The transmittal will be made. A pause. I am sorry for your family's loss, Miss Whitfield. The process of recovery will take time, but the record will reflect what happened here. Nell sat down. Beckett did not look at her, not because he did not want to, but because if he looked at her right now in front of all of these people, what was on his face would be more than he was prepared to make public. He looked at his hands instead, and then he felt something. Her hand, trembling slightly on the bench between them. His hand, the large calloused hand that had built fences and pulled calves from floods and held a rifle steady in Apache territory, moved to cover hers, just for a moment, then withdrew. But enough. It was enough. The room emptied slowly, the way rooms do after something significant, people moving in clusters, speaking in low voices. The particular release of tension that expresses itself in handshakes and exhaled breath, and the occasional short, disbelieving laugh of people who had walked in expecting to lose everything and were walking out with it still in their hands. Virgil Parrish found Beckett by the door. He took his hand with both of his and did not say anything for a moment, which was more than most words would have been. Your father's name is cleared, Beckett said. Virgil's throat worked. Yes, he said, it is. Thea Kincaid walked past and squeezed Beckett's arm without breaking stride. From Thea Kincaid, that was equivalent to a standing ovation. Then she stopped in front of Nell, and she looked at this girl who was 40 years younger than her and had done something that most people twice her age would not have had the steel to do. You come by my ranch sometime, Thea said. I have got good coffee, and I want to hear the rest of the story. The part about your father's orchard. She paused. I know something about holding on to land that people tell you to let go of. Nell nodded, and something in her face that had been held rigid all morning softened just enough to show the exhaustion underneath. Thank you, she said. Dalton Voss stopped in front of Beckett with the sheepish directness of a man acknowledging that he had needed more convincing than the situation required. I will ride by your place next week, he said. That south pasture fence, I have got timber you could use. I will take it, Beckett said. Harlan Kendrick was last. He stopped beside Beckett and looked across the room at Nell, who was talking quietly with Aldridge. And then he looked at Beckett, and his face held the expression of a man who has several things he could say and has decided to say the most essential one. She came out of nowhere, Harlan said. She did, Beckett said. Good thing for all of us, she did. Yes, Beckett said. It is. Outside the courthouse in the cold morning light, the three Graves brothers stood together for a moment. Just the three of them. The way it had been for 13 years since their parents died and left them to build something from nothing on a mountainside in Montana. Slade spoke first. He looked at Beckett, and his voice carried something that Slade Graves almost never allowed into his voice. Tenderness. Last time I saw you look like that was when Rosalind was alive, Slade said. Beckett looked at his brother. Not the angry kind of alive, Slade said. The kind where you have something worth losing. People with something worth losing are the only ones who fight for real. Emmett stood on the other side. Quiet. Listening. Slade looked toward the courthouse door where Nell was emerging with Aldridge. She is not Rosalind, Slade said. Nobody said she has to be. I know, Beckett said. Good, Slade said. Because if you let her leave without saying something, Emmett and I will handle it ourselves. And you will not like how we handle it. Emmett smiled, the widest smile in 3 years. Judson Blake left Elkhorn by midday. He left with his men and his lawyer and under the informal escort of Marshal Webb, who had indeed been in contact with the territorial prosecutor and whose previous discomfort about making decisions had apparently resolved itself sharply in the direction of enforcing the law. Blake left with the quality of a man who was not finished, not beaten in the permanent sense, because men with money and lawyers are rarely permanently beaten. But he had been stopped here, in this place, by people who refused to stay beaten themselves. Beckett watched him ride out from the yard of the livery stable. He did not feel triumphant. He felt something quieter and more durable. The same feeling he got at the end of a long cattle drive when the herd was safely in and the work had held. Not glory, completion. Nell needed to go to Flagstaff. She told him the afternoon after the trial. Standing in the garden she had cleared during those first impossible days. Winter squash was already planted. The soil she had turned over had the deep, rich color of ground that has been properly worked for the first time in years. I need to see my father, she said. I need to sit with him and tell him what happened here. And I need to file the challenge myself with Aldridge's documentation. I want to be the one who files it. When Beckett said, soon, a week maybe, he was quiet. You would come back. It came out somewhere between a question and a statement, and he let it sit there in that uncertain middle ground without trying to resolve it. Because some things need to be said imperfectly to be said honestly. She looked at him. The garden will not be ready for another month, she said. Someone needs to be here for that. And the apple trees, she said, and her voice was quieter now. You said you have not walked up to the North Creek since Rosalind planted them. I would like to see if they are still growing. I would like to see what they have become without anyone watching. Beckett looked at the mountains. Good land always holds out longer than you expect. I will take you up there, he said, when you get back. All right, she said. The day she left, all three brothers were in the yard. Emmett hugged her first, gently, carefully. The way Emmett did everything, like he was handling something that mattered too much to be careless with. Your oatmeal porridge is going to be very missed, he said. And Nell laughed, not the almost smile of the first days, not the careful, measured expression she wore like armor. She laughed. And the sound of it in that yard, in the cold November morning, was the sound of something that had been locked, finding its way open. Slade did not hug her. He nodded once. Hard, sharp. The way Slade said everything that mattered. That east fence is better than it has ever been, he said. You drive nails better than Emmett. Emmett protested. Nell nodded back at Slade, and between them that nod carried the weight of everything that had changed. From the man who had stood in the doorway that first night, with suspicion in every line of his body, to this. One nod. It was enough. Beckett was last. He did not hug her. He did not say much. He stood in front of her, this man, who was a foot and a half taller and 140 pounds heavier, and he looked down at her, and she looked up at him, and the distance between them was very small and very large at the same time. The squash needs water every 2 days, she said. Not every day, every 2. I know how to water squash, he said. You have not watered anything in 3 years, she pointed out. He could not argue with that. Every 2 days, he said. She adjusted the bag on the saddle of the horse Harlan Kendrick had loaned her. Then she turned and looked at him directly. The full, unguarded version of the look he had seen only twice before. In Aldridge's office, when she learned her father's land could be challenged. And in the narrow space beside the courthouse when she told him she was afraid she had dragged him into a fight that could cost him everything. Beckett, she said, and it was the first time she had used his given name instead of Mr. Graves. When I came here, I was out of road. A pause. I want you to know that what you did, what you chose, it was not a small thing. For my father, for Virgil, for all of them. Her voice was even, but just barely. You did not have to choose any of it. I know, he said. I am saying thank you, she said directly. So there is no question. He looked at her for a long moment. Come back, he said. That is all I am asking. She held his gaze. I will come back, she said. She rode out. Three brothers stood in the yard and watched until she was past the east fence line and the dust had settled and the morning had gone completely quiet. Emmett said, "You going to stand here all day? Go get the watering bucket," Beckett said. Emmett smiled wide. Slade shook his head, but the corner of his mouth moved upward by a fraction that he would deny if anyone mentioned it. She came back 6 weeks later. Beckett knew it was her before he could see the rider clearly, knew it by the pace of the horse and the particular set of the figure in the saddle, that straight-backed forward-leaning posture of someone riding with intention. He had learned the shape of her the way you learn the shape of anything that matters, not all at once, in pieces, until the pieces become a whole that you recognize from any distance. He was at the fence line on the north side when she rode in. He walked back across the yard and she dismounted and tied the horse and turned around. She looked different, not lighter exactly. Nothing that had happened was light, but something that had been compressed in her for months, some internal bracing against the next blow had released. She stood in the yard without that constant readiness, and what was left was something open and clear, like a window that has been shuttered so long that when you finally open it, the light that comes through feels like it belongs to a different season. Slade appeared from the barn. Emmett came out of the house. Three brothers and one woman in a yard that had held nothing but grief for 3 years. "How is he?" Beckett said. "Alive," Nell said. "Better than I expected." She paused. "I sat with him and told him everything. He cannot speak clearly yet, but he understood. I know he understood because he held my hand and he did not let go for about an hour." Her voice remained steady through this, but only by effort. The challenge has been filed. Aldridge submitted his documentation personally. He wrote to Flagstaff himself. The territorial judge assigned to it is not the same judge who ruled against us the first time. A pause. "It will take time, but it is moving," Good Beckett said. "Yes," she said. "Good." She looked around the yard, at the fence line, at the corral, at the south side of the barn where the new shingles Beckett had put up last week were still bright against the older wood. She looked at the garden, and even from the wire you could see the squash growing low and spreading exactly the way she had said they would. "You watered every 2 days," she said. "I said I would," he said. Something moved across her face. Simple and complete. The expression of a person seeing proof that a promise was kept in their absence, which is not about squash at all. It is about everything. She reached into her travel bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper, held it out. Beckett took it, opened it. It was a drawing, a rough pencil sketch clearly done from memory. An orchard, 4 trees in a row, roughly drawn but precise in the way that personal memory is always precise. Each tree with its own character. The spacing between them captured exactly. The hand that had drawn it was unsteady. The lines wavered, but the knowing behind them was 30 years deep. "I asked my father to draw them," Nell said. "He could not write, but he could still draw. That is what the apple trees looked like when my mother planted them." She paused. "I thought if we are going to plant more along your North Creek, you would want to know what a good orchard looks like when it starts." Beckett looked at the drawing for a long time. He looked at the 4 trees sketched by a sick man's trembling hand from 3 decades of memory. He looked at the space between them, the careful distance that good planting requires. Room for each tree to grow without crowding the others. Room for roots to spread. Room for something new between the old. He folded the drawing carefully, put it in his shirt pocket, against his chest. "Tomorrow," he said, "we will go up there, to the creek, See what Rosalind's trees need tomorrow, she said. Emmett looked at Slade across the yard. Slade looked at Emmett, both nodded once. The silent agreement of two brothers who had fought together their entire lives and knew without speaking when something important had been settled. That evening, Nell cooked. She had not asked. She had not announced it. Beckett came in from the barn, and the smell hit him exactly the way it had the first night. Warm bread, something thick and good on the stove. The particular quality of a kitchen that is alive with purpose. That has the warmth of a place where someone has chosen to stand and work and create something that will nourish the people she has chosen to nourish. 4 people sat at the table. Beckett across from Nell, Slade and Emmett on either side. The lamp burned warm between them. And the kitchen was quiet in the way that rooms are quiet when they are full of the right things. After a while, Emmett said, "The squash will be ready in 3 weeks." "I know," Nell said. Then Slade spoke. And everyone looked at him because what he said next was something that Slade Graves had never said before in the presence of anyone outside his own blood. "We should think about the south pasture after that," Slade said. "For spring." "We." He said we, and the we included Nell, and he looked around the table as if daring anyone to comment on it. Nobody commented. Emmett smiled into his coffee cup. "I have been thinking about the south pasture," Nell said. "I think it can hold 30, Beckett said, with the right grass and a reliable water rotation." Nell looked at him, and the look on her face, direct and warm and unguarded, carrying the long, quiet history of a week of fence work, in a morning of testimony, in 6 weeks of waiting, and a drawing of an orchard in his shirt pocket. 30 is a good number, she said. "It is a start." Emmett raised his cup slightly. Slade nodded once. Slow. The Slade Graves nod that was worth more than most men's orations. And Nell, for the first time since she had arrived at this ranch, did not sit on the far side of the table. She sat beside Beckett, and when he passed the bread to her, their hands touched, and neither of them pulled away. Spring came early that year. Or maybe it came right on time. It was just the first spring in 3 years when anyone was paying attention. On an April afternoon, the circuit preacher, Reverend Holloway, rode into Elkhorn on his monthly rounds. Beckett had not said anything about it, but Emmett had sent a letter 2 weeks earlier, because of course Emmett had, and Slade had built a new table for the porch out of ash wood. 4 legs, surface planed, smooth enough to set a glass on without it wobbling. He had not been asked to build it, because of course he had not. The ceremony took place on the porch, under the Montana sunset, with 2 candles and a single wildflower bouquet that Thea Kincaid had brought from her own garden. Nell wore the navy blue dress, the same one she had worn the first night, washed clean, pressed flat, and Rosalind's boots. Beckett stood before her, and for the first time in 3 years, his hands shook. The hands that had pulled calves from floods and built fences and held a rifle steady through Apache territory. They shook when they took hers. "I am not good with words," he said, "but I keep my promises. And I promise you this land, this roof, these 4 walls, they are yours as much as they are mine." Nell looked up at him. Her eyes were bright. "I came here at the end of my road," she said. "You gave me a new one. I promise you I will never stop building it." The door closed softly behind them that night. Outside, the Montana stars stretched wide from horizon to horizon. And when morning came, everything between them had changed. They walked up to the North Creek that first spring, together. Beckett had not been there in 3 years, and the walk was longer than he remembered. Or maybe it was not the distance, but the weight of what waited at the end of it. The 4 apple trees Rosalind had planted were still alive. They were smaller than they should have been, twisted from seasons of wind without anyone to stake them straight. But the roots had dug deep into the hard, dry soil and held through 3 winters without anyone walking up to check on them, held through drought and wind and the particular neglect that comes from grief. Good land always holds out longer than you expect. Beckett stood, looking at them for a long time. Nell put her hand on his arm. He did not speak. He did not need to. They planted 6 more that spring, following the spacing in the drawing Amos Whitfield had made with his trembling hand from 30 years of memory. Room for each tree to grow without crowding the others. Room for roots to spread. Room for something new between the old. The herd grew to 15 that first summer. Slade repaired the south barn roof. Emmett built new fence along the pasture. Nell ran the vegetable garden for all 4 of them. Virgil Parrish sent over 2 calves as a gift. Thea Kincaid came by most Saturdays with coffee and stories. Dalton Voss brought the timber he had promised. The first winter together, a blizzard came early in November. 3 days trapped inside. Nell cooked. Slade fixed everything that could be fixed. Emmett told stories, and Beckett, for the first time, spoke about Rosalind. Not much, but enough. About the way she laughed when she planted those apple trees. About how she gave each one a name. Nell listened. She did not compare. She did not compete with a ghost. She simply listened, because she understood that love is not replaced. It is built beside, like new trees next to old ones. Room enough for all of it. 2 years later, their first child was born. A girl. Honey blonde hair like her mother. Amber eyes like her father. Beckett held her with trembling hands. The same hands that had never trembled before anything in this world until now. Emmett suggested the name. Rosalind May. They would call her Rosie. Nobody objected. Slade built the cradle from ashwood, the same kind as the porch table. 5 years on the herd reached 40. The south pasture had come back green. The Graves Ranch had become the thing the land had always wanted to be, if someone stubborn enough had refused to give up on it. Word came from Flagstaff. The ruling had been overturned. Amos Whitfield's land had been returned to his name. He was too frail to work it, but his name was clean. Nell sat at the kitchen table reading the letter, and for the first time since she had arrived at this ranch, tears fell. Not from sadness, from relief. The kind of relief that waits years to arrive, and when it finally does, it comes all at once, and there is no stopping it and no reason to try. Beckett sat beside her, put his arm around her shoulders, said nothing, because some moments do not need words. They need presence. And Beckett Graves had learned after all these years that being present was enough, that it had always been enough. 20 years later, an autumn afternoon, the light in Montana turning gold over the ridgeline the way it does every October when the season begins, its long, slow turn toward winter. Beckett Graves sat on the porch of his ranch house, 51 years old, silver at his temples, hands still calloused but slower now. His back ached on damp days, but his eyes were the same. Amber, sharp, the color of whiskey held up to firelight. The porch had been expanded twice, once when Rosie learned to walk, again when the 3 children who came after her needed room to run. The ashwood table Slade had built still stood in its original place. Solid, level. 20 years of weather and family dinners and Saturday coffee with Thea Kincaid had given it a patina that no amount of craftsmanship could create. Only time could do that. Slade was in the barn, still fixing something, because that was how he existed in the world. Still did not talk much, still nodded. The Slade Graves nod had not changed in 20 years. It was still worth more than most men's orations. Emmett was inside by the fire, telling stories to the grandchildren. The old ones, the one about Slade falling off his horse into the creek, which Slade still denied, which the children still laughed at every single time. Emmett's hair had gone white at the edges, but his smile was the same. The same smile he had smiled in the dark that first morning when he heard Nell making coffee before dawn and knew that something in his brother's house had finally shifted. And Nell, Eleanor Graves, 42, her honey blonde hair carried silver now. Her hands were still precise, still capable. She still made lists, still rose before everyone else, still worked like the ranch itself was the thing she answered to. She came out to the porch with 2 cups of coffee, set one beside Beckett, sat down next to him, said something, did not need to. From the porch, they could see everything, the fence lines running straight along the property. The cattle on the south pasture, the vegetable garden Nell had never let go fallow for a single day. And further out along the North Creek, 10 apple trees, 4 that Rosalind had planted, 6 that they had added, their branches reaching toward each other in the autumn wind, roots deep in the soil, bearing fruit each fall, enough for 4 families every harvest season. Nell remembered stepping through the door of this house for the first time. The smoke, the lamplight, 3 identical men staring at her like an equation with no solution. She remembered the split boot, the bruise on her wrist, the torn brown paper with the list written in her neatest hand. 20 years, 20 autumns, 20 times watching this particular gold light touch this particular ridgeline. And every time, just like the first, the thing that kept her here was not the absence of somewhere else to go. It was the certainty that this was where the road had always been leading. Beckett sipped his coffee, looked at his wife, the woman who had walked into his kitchen with torn boots and cornflower blue eyes, carrying something older than fear. The woman who taught him that the bravest thing a broken man can do is let someone show him where the warmth went and choose with both eyes open to let it back in. Good land always holds out longer than you expect, he said quietly. She looked at him, smiled, the full complete smile he had waited 3 years to see the first time, and 20 more years had never tired of seeing. Yes, she said, it does. The lamp in the window of the Graves Ranch burned the same way it had burned the night Beckett rode home and found a stranger at his stove. Warm, steady, visible from a long way out. Only now it burned for more than four. It burned for a family, for children and grandchildren and neighbors who had become something closer than neighbors. For a legacy built by hand on land that had waited patiently for someone stubborn enough to love it back to life. She belonged here. They all did.